I wasn't the sort of man who noticed things until they were gone. That is the plainest way I know to say it, and I have spent 3 years arriving at plain speech, so I will not dress it otherwise. I was the Duke of Coldmere. I had held the title since I was 24, had managed 40,000 acres, had sat across negotiating tables from men twice my age and left them diminished. I was not a man anyone called careless. I was not a man anyone called blind. And yet, she had been in my house for 2 years before I truly looked at her. That is the accounting I must give, and I give it without softening. Her name was Maren Holt. Her father had been steward of Coldmere Park for 11 years before his health failed, and he retired to a cottage in Ashfield Village, 2 miles below the ridge. She had arrived in his place, not formally, not with a letter of appointment or a contract drawn up in the estate office, but as a matter of quiet practicality. The previous steward's records were in disarray. My housekeeper, Mrs. Coram, had written to me in London to say that the old steward's daughter had offered to set them right, that she had a head for figures and an eye for order, and that she was asking no wage in exchange, only board and the use of the East Archive. I had written back, "If she is useful, let her stay." That was the whole of my attention for 8 months. I returned to Coldmere in the autumn of my 2nd year as Duke to find the estate running with a precision I had not previously known it to possess. The quarterly accounts were prepared before I arrived. The tenant ledgers were cross-indexed against the drainage maps. There was a folded memorandum on my desk, written in a clear, unhurried hand, that listed every capital repair the north pasture fencing would require before winter and what each section would cost. It also, and this detail struck me even then, though I did not pursue the thought, noted which tenants could be asked to contribute labor in exchange for reduced autumn rents, and which could not, and why in each case. I looked at the memorandum for some time. Then I set it aside and went to dress for dinner. I did not ask who had prepared it. I assumed Harwick, my estate manager. I did not think to correct this assumption. The fence repairs were carried out. The north pasture held through February. I wrote to Harwick commending his organization. Harwick, I would later learn, had written the memorandum's figures down from Maren Holt's dictation, because she had understood, after a single week in the estate office, that a recommendation from a young woman with no formal appointment would carry less weight than the same words from a man with a title on the door. She had given him her work and let him attach his name to it. That is the kind of woman she was, and I had sat at my desk and thanked the wrong person for 2 years. I met her properly in December of that 2nd year. I had come down early to the estate office to sign the winter supply orders, and she was already at the long table, her back to the door, comparing 2 sets of bound accounts by lamplight. The fire had not been lit. She had a shawl around her shoulders and ink on the side of her left hand, and she did not hear me come in. I stood in the doorway for a moment. I noticed her hair dark, pinned at the back with what appeared to be a pencil. I noticed the particular focused stillness of her at the table, the way she moved a finger down a column, stopped, moved it back, made a notation in the margin. I noticed the cold of the room and the fact that she had not complained about it to anyone. "Miss Holt," I said. She turned without startlement. That struck me too, not the flinching surprise of a woman caught at something, but the composed turn of a person who had been aware of me for some time and had simply waited for me to speak. "Your Grace," she said, "I apologize for the cold. I came down before the fires were laid. I can return." "Stay," I said. "I have only the orders to sign." She nodded and turned back to her accounts. I signed the orders. I left. I did not speak to her again for 6 weeks. In that time she had reorganized the seed inventory, identified a discrepancy in the timber account that recovered £40, and written, through Harwick again, a proposal for rotating the grazing of the eastern fields that my land agent in London would later describe as one of the more sensible documents he had received from any estate in the north. In March, Lord Fenwick came to stay. He was a peer of middling importance and large opinion, the sort of man who filled the space around him with his own noise. He brought two friends of similar cut, and they stayed for a fortnight's shooting and eating my food and making free with my hospitality. On the third evening, at dinner, Fenwick asked me about the estate management. I told him it ran well. He pressed me. He had heard something about the accounts, the efficiency of the recent winter operations, wanted to know who I had managing things. I told him Harwick was my estate manager. And the girl in the East Archive, he said. He said it the way a man says a thing that is meant to be small. The steward's daughter, what exactly does she do? I considered the question. And this is where I failed, not in cruelty, which I might have recognized and corrected, but in carelessness, which is the thing I carry. She keeps the records tidy, I said. She has a gift for organization, very useful for that sort of work. Fenwick laughed. One of his friends laughed. I did not laugh, but I did not correct what I had said. I moved to another subject. The port was poured. The evening continued. She was in the corridor. I did not know it then. I know it now, Mrs. Coram told me, a year later, when I finally asked the questions I should have asked at the time. Marin had come to leave a document at the office and had passed the dining room door at precisely the wrong moment. Or the right one, perhaps. The corridor carried sound. She keeps the records tidy. She had 2 years of before-dawn mornings in that archive. She had tenant ledgers that she knew from memory. She had a proposal that recovered £40 in a single line and a grazing scheme that my land agent in London had praised. She had given all of it steadily, without complaint, without credit, without a formal appointment or a wage, and what it had earned her in my accounting, spoken aloud before witnesses, was very useful for that sort of work. She did not make a scene. That was the thing that should have told me something if I had been paying attention. She did not come to the office door with her chin lifted and her feelings on her face. She did not seek out Mrs. Coram that evening or write me a letter of correction. She simply went upstairs. By morning she was gone. Mrs. Coram found the East Archive in immaculate order. The accounts were filed and indexed. The pending matters were noted on a separate sheet with the relevant document references. There was no letter to me, nothing addressed to the Duke of Coldmere, nothing requiring a response, nothing that asked me for anything at all. There was one brief note to Mrs. Coram, thanking her for her kindness, and a small tin of the lavender biscuits she baked at Christmas left on the housekeeper's desk. That was the whole of her leaving. A curtsy at the corridor, which I did not see, and a tin of biscuits for the one person in my house who had been kind to her. I returned to London 3 days later. I told myself that she had moved on, that this sort of arrangement was always temporary, that another capable person would be found, that the estate would continue. I told myself this with some conviction for approximately 6 weeks, until the accounts came back from Harwick in April, and I could not read them. I do not mean that Harwick was incompetent. I mean that what I held in my hands was a set of numbers without a mind behind them. The cross-referencing was gone. The marginal notes were gone. The particular quality of attention that had made those records not merely accurate but comprehensible, that had made the whole operation of 40,000 acres feel, I searched for the word and could not find it, felt, was gone. I wrote to Harwick asking whether Miss Holt had left a forwarding address. She had not. I wrote to Mrs. Coram. Mrs. Coram wrote back with the kind of careful neutrality that told me she had opinions she had decided not to share. She did not know where Miss Holt had gone. She believed she had returned first to her father's cottage in Ashfield. Beyond that she could not say. I rode to Ashfield. Her father was a mild, careful man in his 60s, sitting by his fire with a dog at his feet, and no particular enthusiasm for the Duke of Coldmere arriving at his door unannounced. He told me that Marin had stayed with him for a fortnight. He told me she had gone south. He told me this in the tone of a man who knew exactly where she had gone and had decided on her behalf not to share it. I did not press him. I was a duke, and he was an old man who had served my estate for 11 years, and he had already told me, with his silence, what he thought of my errand. I thanked him and rode back up the ridge. Summer came. The estate limped. The accounts required 3 rounds of revision before they were fit to send to London. I hired a trained clerk from Darlington. He was precise, reliable, and entirely without the ability to see 2 steps ahead of a problem, which I had not understood was a skill, until its absence began costing me money in increments too small to name and too constant to ignore. In August, my brother Piers came to stay. Piers was 3 years younger than I was, and considerably more alive to the world. He had a talent for noticing things that I had suppressed in myself, and a talent for saying them that I had never possessed. He sat across my dinner table on his second evening and watched me stare at a set of accounts for 20 minutes and said, "Is this about the woman?" I said it was not. He looked at me the way younger brothers look at older brothers who have said something that is obviously untrue. "Her name was Marin Holt," I said eventually. "I know," he said. "Mrs. Coram told me." I set the accounts down. She was useful to the estate. The work has not been the same since she left. Piers was quiet for a moment. "Is that all she was?" I did not answer him. I poured the wine and changed the subject and lay awake until 2 in the morning asking myself the same question in my own voice, which was considerably less comfortable than being asked it by Piers. What she had been was this: the most quietly capable person I had ever worked beside, the person who had understood without being told the difference between a record that is merely accurate and a record that thinks, the person who had not once in 2 years required me to explain what I needed, who had seen it before I named it and prepared for it before I asked, the person who had been cold in the archive before the fires were lit and had not mentioned it, the person who had given Harwick her best work and not asked him to return the credit. I had described this person to Lord Fenwick as useful for that sort of work. The question Piers had asked me is that all she was one I could answer, in September, to the ceiling above my bed at 2 in the morning, with some clarity. No, she had not been only useful. She had been, and I assembled the words slowly, because I was not in the habit of assembling such words. She had been seen by me, in the small hours of a cold December morning, with a pencil in her hair and ink on her hand, and something in the quality of her stillness at that long table had lodged in me like a splinter, and I had spent 8 months pretending it had not. I had called that nothing. I had called her useful for that sort of work to a man who laughed, and she had been in the corridor, and I had let her go by morning. In October, Piers found her. He did not tell me he was looking. He came back from a fortnight in the East visiting friends, he had said, which was true as far as it went, and he sat down at my table and put a folded paper in front of me with the name of an estate on it. "Renthorpe House," he said. "Sir Aldous Pemby's estate, near the border with the East Riding. She's been there since May. She's running his library and correspondence. He's 81 and half blind, and she apparently reads to him in the evenings and has taken over the management of his charitable accounts." I looked at the paper for a long time. "He pays her," Piers added. "Properly, with a title on the door." I folded the paper and put it in my coat. The first time I rode to Renthorpe, I got as far as the South Lodge gate, which was the point at which I understood I did not know what I intended to say. I turned the horse around and rode home. It took most of a day, and I was cold by the time I arrived, and Mrs. Coram looked at me when I came through the door with an expression that I chose not to interpret. The second time I got to the village 2 miles from the estate, which was progress of a kind. I stopped at the inn, drank a glass of something I did not taste, and thought about what a man says to a woman he has wronged who has, in the time since, arranged her life very competently without him. I could not settle on a beginning. I rode home. The third time I did not stop. It was a gray November morning, frost still on the verges, the kind of cold that makes a man's breath visible and reminds him of precisely how much open countryside separates him from any excuse to turn back. I rode to Renthorpe House and gave my name at the door, and was shown into a small, warm room on the ground floor that served, by the look of it, as an estate office and a correspondence room combined. She was at a writing table near the window. She was composing a letter, and she finished the sentence she was writing before she looked up. That, too, was exactly as I remembered. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice was even. There was no coldness in it, no performance of injury, no careful warmth either. Only a composure so thorough that it took me a moment to understand I was afraid of it. "Miss Holt," I said. "You have ridden a long way," she said. "Sit down if you like, there is tea." I sat. She did not pour it. She returned briefly to the letter, folded it, and addressed it in that same clear, unhurried hand. Then she set it aside and looked at me with the kind of patient attention a very busy person gives a caller who has arrived without an appointment. "I came to speak with you," I said. "I imagined so," she said. I had rehearsed things riding east. They had all seemed adequate at the time. In this room, in front of this particular composure, none of them survived. "I said something last March," I said. "Before Fenwick, you were in the corridor." "Yes," she said. "I should not have said it. It was what I said was not what I knew to be true. It was carelessness. It was the specific carelessness of a man who assumes that the people around him understand what he thinks of them without requiring him to say it, and that is an assumption that I have since learned." I stopped. "I am making a poor account of this." "You are making a fair account of it," she said quietly. "Go on." "You gave 2 years to Coldmere. You gave it before dawn and after dark, and you gave it through Harwick's name because you understood that was the way it would be heard. And I sat at that dinner table and called it tidy record-keeping." She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, "you did." "I have not been able to replace what you did," I said. "I have tried. I have hired 3 people. I do not say this as it is not a position I am offering, Miss Holt. That is not what I came here to say." "Then what did you come to say?" This was the sentence I had not been able to finish, in 2 failed approaches and 1 long autumn. I had reached the edge of it a dozen times in the dark and retreated. In this room, with the frost on the window and the letter folded on the writing table and her waiting without impatience, I understood that there was no preparation that was going to make it easier. There was only the saying. "I came to say that I did not see you clearly," I said, "and that I have spent the better part of a year understanding what I failed to see. I came to tell you what you were, what you are, because you left without anyone saying it to you, and you should have had it said." She looked at me steadily. "You were the most capable person at Coldmere," I said. "You were the mind behind the accounts and the grazing scheme and the fence repair that held through February. You understood what the estate needed before I did, consistently, and you prepared for it without being asked. You gave that work freely and you asked nothing for it, and when I failed to account for it accurately you left without a complaint or a scene, which is more dignity than I deserved from you." I stopped. The room was very quiet. "You were also," I said, and here my voice was less even, "the person I have thought about every morning for 11 months, and not because of the accounts." She said nothing for a moment. The frost made a small sound against the glass. Somewhere in the house a clock counted the half hour. "That is plainly said," she said at last. "I have been practicing," I said. Something shifted in her face. Not softness exactly, not yet, but something that was the precursor to it, a held breath released. "You rode here twice before this," she said. I looked at her. "How did you know?" "The lodge keeper at the south gate knows your horse," she said. "He mentioned it to the housekeeper, who mentioned it to me." A pause. "The second time you got as far as the village." I could feel the heat in my face, and I was grateful briefly that the room was cold enough that it might be attributed to the ride. "Yes," I said. "Why did you go back?" I did not know what to say, I said. I had not yet. I needed to arrive at what was true before I could say it. She considered this. "And now you have arrived at it." "I have." "Then I will tell you what I need," she said, "before anything else is said." "Tell me." She folded her hands on the writing table. "I need you to say what I was by name, not to me privately, to the county, not at a ball or a public occasion that would be its own sort of theater, but in the ordinary course of things. When people ask about the estate, when the accounts are discussed, when the grazing scheme comes up, which it will, because Sir Aldous has already mentioned it to half a dozen men in the East Riding, I need my name attached to my work. That is the one thing." I thought about what she was asking. It was a small thing in one direction and an enormous thing in another, and she knew this, and she had asked it anyway without softening. "Done," I said. She looked at me for a moment, as if testing the weight of it. "Not," I added, "because I am asking you for anything in return. Done because it is the truth and because it should have been said 2 years ago, and saying it now is not a price I am paying. It is the least I owe." She was quiet for a long time. The frost settled. The clock in the passage counted 3 slow beats. "I am not unhappy here," she said finally. "I want you to know that. I am not. I did not leave Coldmere undone, and I did not come here to wait. I came here because Sir Aldous needed someone and the work was real, and it is." "I know," I said. "Piers told me." "Your brother found me." "He finds most things," I said. "He is considerably more observant than I am." Something moved in her face again. That precursor to softness, closer now. "I will think about it," she said. "What you have asked, what you have said." "I have not asked anything," I said. "You have asked something," she said. "You have asked it by being here, by coming 3 times, by saying what you said. You are a man who does not do things without purpose, Your Grace. I know that from 2 years of observation." I had nothing to answer to this, because it was accurate. "I will write to you in a fortnight," she said. I stood. She stood. We were the same height nearly, which I had not noticed before, or had noticed and filed beside all the other things I had filed and left untended. "The accounting of what I owe you is longer than what I have said today," I said. "I am aware of that." "Yes," she said simply, "it is. I intend to be a long time paying it." She looked at me. For the first time since I had walked into the room, something in her face was not measured. It was only a moment, a brief, unguarded instant before the composure returned, but I had become, in 11 months, a man who looked carefully. She wrote to me in 12 days, not 14. The letter was brief. It said that she had spoken with Sir Aldous, who had been kind and gracious, and had agreed to stay through the new year to assist his new correspondent in understanding the charitable accounts. It said that she had one further condition, which was that she would not return to Coldmere in any capacity she had held before, and that if I intended to proceed, I should proceed knowing this. It said that she was enclosing the name of the solicitor who would need to be involved. I read it 4 times, then I rode to my own solicitor. She came to Coldmere in February. Not to the East Archive. To the great drawing room, where Mrs. Coram had laid a fire and arranged the good tea service, and stood in the doorway with an expression that she did not bother to conceal, which was one of thorough satisfaction. We talked for most of the afternoon. About the estate she had questions, direct and practical, about what had changed and what had not, and I answered them without evasion. About Piers, whom she had not yet met in person, and about whom she said several accurate things on the basis of the letter he had sent her in November, which he had sent without telling me, in the same spirit of thoroughly unsolicited helpfulness that defines everything he does. About her father, who was well, who had been told, and who had received the news with the remark that it was about time, and the offer to make tea. He approved, I said. He said, she told me, that he had always thought you were capable of seeing clearly, if given enough time and sufficient inconvenience. I looked at her. That is a very precise characterization. He had 11 years to observe you, she said. He is a precise man. I looked at the fire. He is not wrong. She was quiet for a moment. Then, neither were you in the end, you saw it. Too late, I said. Not too late, she said. Later than it should have been. That is not the same thing. It was the kindest thing she could have said, and she said it in the tone of a woman who was not being generous for generosity's sake, but was saying a thing she believed. I had learned by then to tell the difference. We were married in April in the parish church at Ashfield. 7 guests. Her father in the front pew, Piers beside him, Mrs. Coram in the good coat she wore for occasions she considered important. No county assembly. No announcement in the London papers beyond the plain notice required by law. No invitation to Lord Fenwick, who had, I am told, attempted to congratulate me at his club and been told by Piers with considerable civility that I was unavailable. She wore a dark blue dress, not the white of a society wedding, which she had no interest in, but the exact shade of blue that I had seen once in a length of cloth she had held up against the archive window, testing the light. She had a handful of early snowdrops pinned at the collar. The church smelled of cold stone and old wood and the candles Mrs. Coram had insisted on providing from her own stores. The vicar was a quiet man who understood that we were not there for ceremony but for the thing itself. He read only what was necessary. When it was done, her father shook my hand for a long time, looking at me with the level assessment of a man who has decided to believe in a thing, but is making sure his eyes are open. Look after her, he said. I intend, I said, to be considerably more attentive than I have previously demonstrated. He looked at me a moment longer, then the corner of his mouth turned. See that you are, he said, and went to find Mrs. Coram's tea. I am writing this from the estate office at Coldmere Park, not the East Archive, which is now properly staffed and properly credited, and has a typed notice on the door listing everyone who works within it. The estate office, which has a second desk now, and a second lamp, and a second set of annotated ledgers in a hand I have known for 3 years, and failed to honor for 2 of them. She is at that desk now. There is a pencil in her hair. There is ink on the side of her left hand. The fire is lit. I see to this myself in the mornings, before the household is fully awake, because I understand now the particular cold of arriving before the fires are laid, and I have no intention of letting her arrive to it again. She has not asked me to do this. She will not mention that she has noticed it. That is her nature, the same stillness, the same composure, the same capacity for care given without accounting. But she knows. I have made certain she knows. The county knows her name now. The land agent in London knows her name now. The grazing scheme in the East Fields, which has been in operation for 2 years, and which every practical farmer within 20 miles has quietly adopted, has her name on the original document, filed in the estate archive, indexed correctly. Lord Fenwick has not been back to Coldmere. I have not extended an invitation. There are mornings when I sit at this desk and I think about the corridor, about what she heard, about the particular quality of the choice she made, not to make a scene, not to write a correcting letter, not to ask me for anything at all, but simply to curtsy and go, and to build something elsewhere that was entirely her own. She did not wait for me to see her. She did not make herself smaller in the hope that I might finally notice. She left, and she thrived, and she was not waiting when I came. I am grateful for this. I am grateful she was not waiting. I am grateful she made me ride to that gate twice and turn back, made me sit in a village inn with a glass I did not taste, made me arrive at what was true before she would hear it. I am grateful for the fortnight that was 12 days, and for the solicitor, and for the blue dress. I was the most feared man in 3 counties. I was also, for 11 months, the most thoroughly undone. She looked up from the ledger. "You are watching me," she said without turning. "I am," I said. She made a notation, "productive." "Very," I said. The corner of her mouth moved. She did not turn around. She returned to the column and I returned to mine, and the fire held, and the morning was cold outside and warm within, and I did not look away.